Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Not sure where you're coming from, and thank you for joining us on the 2024 Exploring the Top HR Trends with HR Strategies Consulting. My name is Dan Whitmarsh, and I'm joined today by my wonderful and talented colleague Leslie Dalzell, who is the
Hello.
Senior HR Consultant from our Vancouver office. So we've got a couple time zones covered here to meet up with you folks today. I really am looking forward to this WebEx and this content. It seems to be, I think this is our fourth year, Leslie, doing this event where we kind
Yes.
of take a review into the data and the trends and what's happening in the HR industry. So
Yeah.
without any further ado, let's just kind of get into some housekeeping items as we venture into our first, couple slides here. Again, Dan Whitmarsh, Senior Solutions Consultant with HR Strategies Consulting. We'll often refer to ourselves as HRSC in case you're wondering. And Leslie, who we've already introduced, she is also our PROSI certified lead on our change management practice. So our strategy today is very encompassing. We're going to do our introductions to a bit about HR Strategies Consulting. It's important to understand who we are and where we come from. So that puts the perspective of why we're doing this event in place. And then we're going to talk to you about the process we use to review the HR trends. Then, of course, we're going to reveal what those trends are in order of magnitude, and then talk about, items that are advancing and getting more gravitas, things that are staying neutral, and things that have changed over year to year. And then we're going to break open each individual item and discuss the commentary and items that we're seeing out of there. Excuse me. And at the end, we're going to give you a short and simple exercise that's going to help you understand and prioritize your trends and how to address whatever you need to do to move your organization forward. I mean, all this knowledge is great recap and summarization of what's happening in the HR industry, but again, it has to be connected to action. So let's make sure we get to that. All right. Now, our good colleague Sarah, who is running the event today, is on the chat. She's going to publish out some information. If you have questions and comments, please feel free to add them into the chat. And then we will park some time at the end to review questions if we have time. All right, let's get at it. Here's a little bit about HR Strategies Consulting, or HRSC. We have been a consultant agency for over 30 years, and in the last 10, we've ventured into the HR technology space as an SAP Gold partner. We have over 80 plus qualified professionals, not just in the HR side, but also on the HR IT side and support side that service our clients across 5 different locations. We are in Australia, Canada, India, Singapore, and the United States. And of course, if you don't hear the accent, you'll recognize shortly that Leslie and I are both on the northern side of the 49th parallel up in Canada. We are an award-winning partner. We've achieved several accolades with SAP as a partner. And then, but we still have not lost our roots in terms of being an HR strategies consultant. And that's where we put the HR into the HR IT practices. When we think about what HR strategies does as a business, we have kind of 3 key pillars of how we're reimagining HR. We have a strategic consulting pillar, which is Leslie's bailiwick, where she spends the majority of her time. This is where we'll help organizations understand policies, practices, and processes, help them assess technologies and vendors, address the more softer issues like DEIB issues, look for change management functions to help drive adoption of systems and processes. And then in the middle, we have an HRIT practice. So this is largely based off of SAP success factors, but we do work with other platforms as well. And in there, we found that in the past, we were helping organizations get to the door of making a technology investment. And now we've actually gone through that door ourselves and are a partner and reseller and support a service provider for the SAP success factors platform. So with that in mind, we'll do the work in the implementation, but we also offer support to clients who've gone live with other vendors or partners and are now just looking for some HR consulting and support to bolster up, shore up, or move their HR IT practices forward. So while these seem like three different discrete or separate silos of business, really there's significant overlap between them because the support really often requires consulting leveraged by technology, and the HR technology has to rely on an understanding of HR practices. So they're tightly intertwined, but we do kind of just give you a visualization to help understand how they come together. All right, that's enough about HR strategies consulting for the moment. Let's talk about this process. This is a real joy to do. I've been doing this now, I think I've mentioned, a fourth year, 3 years with Leslie. She's brought great insights and expertise to this every year, and I'm thankful and happy to always work with her on this project. The process is really quite simple. When we started looking at the research, which we were monitoring in the first place, we saw that there was great variation in all of the different analyst or research papers that were coming out on the market. And what we thought made more sense was to do a kind of consolidation or a meta review of the actual HR practices that are out there. So what we did, much like we do every year, we just start Googling who has a prognostication of what's coming up in 2024. What are the trends? What are people working on? So we get a whole list of providers. And, as we've mentioned, this is our fourth year. So we have a previous list and we go back to them to see if they've updated their targets or their dreams of what they want to see done in 2024. And we work through that list. Some vendors publish something one-off in 2023 and don't contribute in 2024. So then we have to add others into the mix. And what happens is we end up with the usual suspects. As you can imagine, here's a kind of a race car, NASCAR slide of all the different brands that are in this year's report. We have 24 unique sources of the research, which made for 182 unique items that they discussed amongst those 24 pieces of research. Some had a top 3 list, others had a top 10 list, others had 15. It varies greatly. Now, then Leslie and I have to go through that research and remove for bias or self-promotion. And by that, we mean, imagine that somebody came out with the top 10 HR priorities for 2024, but they're an applicant tracking vendor and everything was centric around the recruitment or doing interviews or, having a good candidate experience. That's really not truly representative of the broad strokes that HR encompasses. It's very single point solution. And while we'll look at those pieces of advice and we tend to incorporate them into our talk track when we talk about those items, we've just elected not to include those for skewing the data into a particular genre or area of HR that we're going to cover in our items. So that's just the process for reviewing that self-promotion bias. Once Leslie and I have gone through all of the articles and we gain consensus amongst us and our team on what we're doing, we theme them. We've been using the same themes largely year over year. We'll see those in a moment. And then we start to theme them in terms of a major theme and a sub-theme. And it's really important to note that some items constitute more than one theme. So if you're adding up the counts and doing the math, you might see, well, we had 184 items. There could be 226 pieces because some items might really belong into more than one category. So those items are all collected and themed. We do the math. We note that there's a lot of connection points between the two. This is not meant to be a series of discrete siloed events. These are really things that permeate across HR. And through our discourse and discussing them, Leslie and I often have to decide, I think this one goes here, and I think it goes here. And then, the more we explain and justify, we come to a consensus of where this item should land. So then we'll look at all of those items. We summarize the themes. And here are the categories that we use. It all evolves around HR and the human experience. And we have a list of the 12 themes. And this is just in alphabetical order. So don't get too excited thinking that you're seeing the rollout of what they are. But we start with AI technology, the ability to change HR. We will provide detailed definitions of how we categorize this with each item. But for now, we're just covering the items. We've got diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, health and safety, and wellness. We've got job role and transformation. We've got learning and development. We've got measurement and metrics. We've got performance issues. We've got recruiting issues. We've got workforce planning items. So, with no further ado, I think we need to really get into the items here, Leslie, and talk about their
Absolutely.
prioritization. All right, here we go. Here it is. 2024 themes in order of magnitude. Let's start over on the far right side. Workforce planning, recruiting, the other category. We're going to talk about that shortly. Measurement, health and safety and wellness, performance management, human experience management, DEIB, learning and development, changing HR, job role transformation, and at the top of the list is AI technology. And if we view this in terms of the total percentage of responses, it still skews the same, but we're just looking at it now in a different level of magnitude for all of those items. Okay. For those who are wondering, yes, this deck is going to be available to all, so you'll have this. And it's really important, as we'll see at the end, to understand where you sit on your journey and what you're going to do against this. So let's look at some changes over time. So we've been doing this now for 4 years, so we can see with each of these items how these things have varied wildly from time to time. And the comments we're going to discuss when we look at this are going to give us some light as to why it's changed and either gaining ground or shifting ground. Okay. When we look at those items that are emerging or getting more gravitas, let's say, or more significance, we see job role transformation really took a significant jump. We also see the use of AI and technology has taken a significant jump, and the other category has taken a jump. So other is now on the cusp of almost coming into the bottom realm of some of our other items. So at some point in the near future, it may warrant a new category to morph as it gains enough traction, and we look at that. So those are things that became more important or more frequently discussed through the research we've reviewed. On the neutral side, we've got 4 items, Learning and development. I notice there's a slight change of only 1%. We've deemed 1% as remaining neutral. The statistics diehards amongst us can persecute us later if they choose. Health and safety and wellness has remained neutral. Performance management is neutral, and the measurement capability is neutral. By no means does neutral mean it is not less important. It just means that it's shifted its prioritization based on what's happening in 2024 for HR and the workforces that they're dealing with. Now, on the receding side, likewise, does not mean any less important, but we have 5 items that have slipped a little bit. Changing HR has taken a pretty significant slip between 23 and 24. The human experience management has, so has DEI, so has recruiting, and so has workforce planning. So as we talk about all of these trends of advancing priorities, neutral priorities, receding priorities, it's time to get into the trends. And with that, I've done enough talking. I'm going to pass it over to Leslie to talk about workforce planning. And Leslie, I'm your clicker here. I'm running the slide deck, so you tell me when to start clicking.
You're my clicker, and feel free to jump in anytime you would like to. So I am starting with workforce planning, and as you saw from Dan, it is one of the ones that have lost some traction. So it actually has decreased about 2% over the last year. But before we get into that, so how did we define workforce planning? So for us, we defined it as the process of analyzing, forecasting, and planning workforce supply, demand, assessing gaps, and determining target talent management interventions to ensure that an organization has the right people with the right skills at the right place at the right time to fill the organizational strategies. So that's how we define workforce planning. So as we said, it's decreased only about 2%, which is not significant. So there wasn't a lot of change from last year. Skill-based hiring was top of the realm. That was what was discussed the most. That's still holding true for this year. The interesting thing, and this does have, a lot of these do have some interactions, but the skill beast is actually overlapping degrees. And this has a bit of a DEIB influence, I think, as well, as looking at our workforce, making sure that we're including as many people as possible and not having that education piece as a ceiling or a barrier to apply. So as you say, a lot of these things do, and that's one of the trends that we did find is that other years things were a little bit more siloed. This year, they're starting to be a little bit more combined, which I think is actually a good thing. So what is emerging in workforce planning? So, HR is adapt to having just various types of contributors and flexible workers. So what does that mean? So it means that our workforce is changing, and we're actually seeing different types of work coming in. So atypical types of career paths. As you know, COVID had a big impact on people kind of reassessing their lives, seeing what they would like to do. People are starting to retire. There's people that took mid-year career breaks, shift industries, and really as HR and looking at our workforce planning, we need to include this sort of contingent workforce and how we're actually planning. We need to change the mindset of what is regular and how we look at our workforce. So what organizations really need to focus on this year as well, besides looking at this a little bit more holistically, is pay transparency. And I know this has been drilled into everybody over the last year, and with more legislation coming out, it is actually really important to make sure that pay transparency is there for just not only current employees, but also for future employees as well. And having that transparent compensation framework will help with that recruitment, will help with that career progression, and will help with retention as well. That's what I have so far with workforce planning. Dan, anything you want to add in there? You always have some great stats.
Yeah, pay transparency is going to come up again when we talk about performance management. So
It
again,
will.
to your point, Leslie, these are really intertwined. It's not like they're very isolated or siloed events.
Yeah, and we found that really significant this year with a lot of the topics that were discussed.
Mm-hmm. We
Okay,
shift to
so
the next one.
we can shift to the next one. So the next one that saw a bit of a decrease is recruitment. It was a just about 2% decrease. So again, not significant, um, not super significant over last year. You know, the discussion areas that we saw was that competitive compensation, recognition, rewards, training, work-life balance, and recruitment. Those are the things that candidates are looking for, and that organizations should be focusing on is looking at that whole package. You know, like as Dan said at the beginning, when we have our 12 pillars, we have the human experience right in the middle, and that is really holding true for a lot of our areas this year, and recruitment is not an exception to that. The other thing with recruitment as well that employees are looking for, they're looking for training. And so I myself do a lot of recruitment. I talk to lots of candidates, and a lot of those candidates, they're asking for it. They're like, what's my career path? What do you have internal training? Do you have external training? Do you support that? And that's becoming more of a conversation with candidates. And that is something that if organizations are looking to grow and to brand, they may want to embrace that piece as well. Okay, and then the other piece that also doing some recruitment, if there's recruiters out there on the call right now, you will have seen this as well. Recruitment is starting to shift into, prior to COVID, it was very much an employer market. During COVID, it was an employee market. It's still kind of a little bit like that. It's kind of come back into the middle, but as talent acquisition professionals, we're now finding that we actually have to really engage our candidates, really develop those relationships, because the recruitment cycles are a little bit longer. People are a little bit more hesitant to leave, and they're really looking for that right fit. And so we want to be more of that transparent, that building those relationships with candidates and making sure we're thinking about them when roles are coming up, and doing a bit of a touch base with them as well. So really fostering those relationships with those candidates that you're looking for. One of the other pieces as well, so we talked about that relationship building and recruitment, and as another point is, and we're going to talk about this probably in a few of our slides because this came up a lot, is the workforce work environment as well. We have, I'll talk about the flexible workforce. I will do that first. So the flexible workforce, again, we talked about those contingent pieces, allowing people to come in different ways. We want to make sure that we're encompassing that whole strategy. And there's also the hidden workforce as well. So the hidden workforce refers to about the 27 million. This is an interesting stat that Dan found. 27 million, and this was an American study, Americans who are often rejected or underutilized because of unfair hiring practices like caregivers or retirees. And this is sort of that hidden workforce that we need, that as in recruitment area, we'll want to dive into a little bit more, because these are people that are not even on the radar. So we'll need to make sure that we're incorporating that. And again, with a DEIB lens, that should help with that. And of course, when we look at recruitment, technology is a big piece of that. And so we want to make sure that technology and the recruitment strategies are allowing, so we can make sure we're digging in to uncover that hidden workforce as well. Okay.
Leslie, if I can add on to that, you're
Absolutely.
right. That labor shortage is often discussed in the recruitment phase, and that there's just not going to be enough people to fill the jobs. So obviously lowering the bar is one initiative in terms of the skills required, but to that hidden workforce element, they were even bold enough to include ex-inmates, to
That's right.
retirees, college students, university graduates who are looking to supplement their income. A lot of this is going to come up in the job role transformation item that we're talking about, because it really is also incorporating a different way to navigate an employee and employer relationship. So it's not just, I'm going to bring you on full time and you're one of us. We could have to maybe put these people at arm's length and work through that kind of flexible and hidden workforce in a different way than we normally would right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Dan. Excellent
No
points on
worries.
that.
Let's go to that other category.
Okay, so the other category, so it was quite interesting. So our other category last year had a few more aspects to it. This year we found a lot of those actually being pulled out into other categories, but it still ended up being a little bit high. And like Dan had said, we feel like some of these categories are going to have its own thing. So it's going to have its own little pillar. So ESG was one of them. Oh, first of all, there was about, as you can see there, so it's 2% increase overall. So the ESG, it was interesting. There was a lot of talk about this, a lot of the articles about candidates really wanting to work for organizations that are socially conscious, that are honest. Like they had, that was a big theme that actually came through in a lot of it. And I think we're going to see more of that. And again, that's going to be incorporated into the whole life cycle of an employee. But this is something to watch for in 2024 and to think about when you're looking at your internal practices and when you're looking for candidates. So there's ESG. And then the next one is politics, actually. So it's quite interesting. This year has a lot of elections that are happening all over the world. It can be quite polarizing, politics and politics in the office. And so when we're looking at that, we want to make sure that we are creating an environment where either healthy discussions can happen, or we have ways to make sure that there isn't conflict with that. But it is something to think about, if with all the elections, that this could be a bit of an issue in the workplace. So just to be aware of that. And then the other piece that we're looking at is sort of the data security. So with more people and more employees being online, being remote, there's always been an increase of technology. And then this year, there's a big focus on making sure we have data security and privacy for employees as well. So those two things coming together. And as we talked about, and there's HR under the spotlight as well. And so this is interesting, and I know Dan, you're going to jump in on this one as well. Is HR? Yeah, like there was one article that had HR meets PR, and with social media, and I think everyone's seeing like the TikToks, firing ones that have come out. All of our practices and our presence and even our executives that are in the spotlight are having an impact on organizations. So it's almost a little bit of a shift for HR in order to think about how what we're doing is being viewed, and just to be a little bit more conscious of that as well. So I don't know. Dan, I don't know if you have anything to add to that one. It was an interesting discussion point that we had on that one.
No, well covered. Well covered. Let's move to measurement.
Okay. Okay, so measurements. So how we define measurement here is looking at HR metrics that are determined to determine the value and effectiveness of those HR initiatives, as well as to help drive decisions. This remained relatively neutral, as we can see up there. Last year there was a push to invest in platforms to produce employee data, help organizations shape and empower employees. And this year really is to master that data. So we have everything in place. We want to make sure that we're mastering that data. So in one of the reports we had, it was Burson, I believe, said that an average organization has 80 plus HR tools, and getting all that data together is difficult. So this is where that mastering of data is really going to help, because we have ATS systems, you've got your central core HR systems, you have all the metrics that you need to capture, and trying to get that all into one is a challenge. But that's what this year needs to be about, is actually getting that data and making sure that we have the information we need to help support the organizations to make the right decisions. In addition to, it was interesting, it's another article say that 20% of the workers view their jobs as socially useless and not productive. So I thought that was a very interesting stat to read. It's very, very interesting. And again, this is where we can use data. This is where we can use metrics. This is where we can help measure what that actually means. So if people are feeling that their jobs are useless, why is that, and how can we make them feel that it has impact? And that's where measurement's going to come in.
Yeah, excellent. I'm going to talk a bit about that stat as well, Leslie, when we get to
I know you were. So I don't want to go too far into that. So
No worries.
Okay, that's it for me. I think it's over to you, Dan.
Yeah, I'm going to take on the next topic, which was around health and safety and wellness. And we actually had kind of three subcategories associated with health and safety and wellness. This historically used to be just a category dedicated to employees on a shop floor or in the field. And it wasn't really a strategic HR function. But when the pandemic set in, it really became part of this research project, and we've seen it remain on the list since then. So while this item is kind of trending neutral, it's still, only went down by 1%. It doesn't mean it's any less important. So the real focus here is on these three types. You can see I'm going to start with the largest, which is just wellness. This sub-theme really was dominated by discussions around understanding what managers and organizations need to be mindful that managers and organizations do need to be mindful of employees' needs for flexibility in their work, not just in the place and time that they work, but how they can bring their own personality and their whole self to work and create positive impacts in the work being done while, simultaneously improving the culture of their work environment. So it's really about understanding that if we don't do this, we run the risk of poor performance and unhappy employees and may contribute to the mental health issues. Mental health was the second category. This isn't just being cognizant that mental health exists. It's not a reactive response. It's about being proactive and accepting that an employee could be experiencing mental health challenges. It's more about proactive policies that are going to give us psychologically safe workplaces so people feel comfortable voicing ideas, opinions, and what's really happening with them, and putting processes in place, and even training managers. We're going to talk about that on the learning and development side to deal with agents and issues that negatively impact performance, and then equipping them with the ability to do something, provide mental health treatment to remedies to those who need it, really. And this is going to bring out that psychological safety, enhance the empathy of managers, and reduce quiet quitting and burnout. The last part of this, the least notable of the pie chart here, is just around the physicality of work. It's about workplace health, safety, and security. It's about making sure people are physically safe in their workplaces. And when we did this research the first time, it was right at the onset of COVID, and so this was a huge topic. It's obviously decreased significantly by that now. But what is kind of new and interesting in here is that they're now starting to add in policies to address work through climate catastrophes. I mean, we've got wildfires, flooding, severe storms happening all over the world, and it's affecting people who are working remotely or if they have to be on site, the ability to get there. So it's not just about protecting the organization's assets to making sure there's continuity and work is getting done. It's about making sure our employees are protected from these dangers and will adapt to their work needs to accommodate these things should they happen to them. So that's a very new element that we've never seen in the research before.
Yeah, and
A
just
key
to add,
tip here.
oh, sorry.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
just to add to that, out of the articles we read, it was the climate change that was predominantly in this category, and making those changes. So it's quite interesting. It's the first time we've seen that particularly. So, okay,
Yep.
sorry.
And an HRSC tip of note here is that this is not a one size fits all. This isn't about a bunch of executives sitting in a boardroom and deciding what the organization needs. It's going to cascade to a manager employee conversation that's going to be personal for each manager and each employee. It's not a one size fits all. And we're going to talk about that when we get to performance and learning and development more. Okay. The next item we had on our list was around human experience management. So everybody's familiar with human capital management. It's taken a shift now because I think Deloitte in one of their papers talked about 87% of HR practitioners realize that employees are asking for more of the organization. Not money, not time, not perks, benefits. They just need more tools, tips, tricks, and resources to get their lives in order, as well as do their work more efficiently. So this really dovetails nicely off of health and well-being because it's about allowing that whole person to show up to work. You know, you don't get somebody who just tightens widgets from 9 to 5. You've got a whole personality and all of their experiences, and the organizations need to be equipped to accommodate them and all of those skills that they're bringing outside of what you need. So we're using this thing to capture all that conversation and commentary around the items that focus on what an organization should be doing to ensure they're addressing all the moments that matter for an employee. So this can range from simple self-service items. You know, how do they get a letter of employment? How do they update moments that matter? How do they add dependents? How do they change their marital status? Because all these have implications on an HRIS system, in addition to emotional changes that the person may be going through, right? So the biggest portion of this, excuse me, is the employee experience. So we need to think about providing a consumer-like experience instead of negative encounters, right? I challenge you to think of some recent event where you went somewhere and you expected to go to a counter and they treated you wonderfully and they gave you this and you checked into the hotel beautifully, or you went there and it was really rude and abrupt and it was an encounter. So somewhere in that continuum of a wonderful experience to a horrible encounter, we have to do that to our employees. We've got to build our encounters into experiences. So these are really important things. The next part of this is around digitalization. So this just plain makes sense. I mean, we need to take all of these transactional things where paper's involved and get them online, because only once they're online are we going to be able to make them reportable data and events and understand how many times this happens or what's happening or what's the content of what's happening. And it's going to give us a history that's happened. And then when we talk to AI, now that we've seen all of these transactions, we may even get to the point of using predictable AI, not generative AI, to say, hey, if you did this and you did this, do you need to think about doing this as well? And give them those types of experiences through AI. And the last part of this, of course, isn't obvious. Once we digitalize all this, we're going to save some trees, which is really an important thing to do, right? Next, we've got personalization. So personalization isn't the same as digitalization. Personalization means allowing Leslie Dalzell to log into work and have a super organized Spartan-like desktop with 3 quick icons that launch her into whatever she needs to get doing today, versus Dan Whitmarsh, who opens his desktop and has 66 icons packed in no random order, and that's the way he likes to do things. We have to respect that everybody does things differently, and we need to allow them to personalize their workspace so that they feel comfortable and they're productive. Hey, personalization means productivity. And when we make this digital, we're going to be able to find bottlenecks and provide inline training, which is huge. It didn't come up in the learning and development as a talk track as much this year as it has in the past, but really the means to advancing knowledge and skill sets isn't about sending somebody away to take a course. It's about recognizing they're stuck on a screen and being able to provide a quick micro burst of training in that moment on that screen to get them past it so that they're through it, right? That's what inline training is. And then, of course, personalization is going to allow for that whole self to show up and promote their brands and really fortify and strengthen our culture. A key HR stats of note is that organizations that provide a poor experience have a 38% increase in voluntary turnover, and high performing HXM orgs, meaning organizations that do these 3 items really well, are 2.4 times more likely to be better at DEI, 2 times more agile, almost 2 times more innovative, almost 2 times more productive, and 1.4x more profitable with 20% less burnout. So tell me why you wouldn't want to do this. It's just a struggle to understand that people are still not adopting to modern HR technologies to deliver a good experience. Leslie, anything to add on that one?
Nope, I love it. It's all good. I love those. I love those stats too. I think they're fantastic and I think very true.
Cool. Let's move to the next one, which I think is back to you, right?
It is. So that was actually a good transition into our DEIB, our diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging slide. So this one saw also a slight decrease of about 2% over last year. So this decrease, though, doesn't mean that DEIB is losing focus. In 2020 and 2021, we saw organizations putting in or starting to put these DEI strategies into place and really thinking about how this is impacting their organizations. In 2022, we saw these strategies put into actions. And today, DEIB is now shaping those policies. It's contributing to innovating and moving from an idea to actually becoming part of the DNA of an organization. And that's the progression we want to see. We want to see DEIB starting, we have those discussions, and we want it to become second nature. So again, it's not like it's losing focus. I think it's taking hold, and it's just adapting. One thing we want to focus on, though, is continuous education and training. So yes, we're getting to a point where it's starting to become a bit of the DNA of our organizations, but focusing on continuous education, training on DEI, we can't stop that. There still needs to be that focus. We still need to cultivate that inclusive culture, and we need to minimize that bias. So that has to continue. Those efforts still need to continue. And again, as I talked about in the recruitment section, there's a big push for transparency. So transparent not only in pay, you have about your reporting, your accountability, and really to showcase what your DEI efforts, DEIB efforts are. And so a quick note, and this was actually something we talked about last year, but I wanted to kind of bring this back in again, because within DEIB, we want to make sure that this is not always HR driven. So this actually needs to be having that buy-in at that C level, but it needs to be championed by the C levels. It needs to be supported by HR. It needs to be driven by employees. And if we have that, you're more successful to make that as part of your DNA. Okay, Dan, back to you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so I've got performance management, which was a neutral item, really just kind of hovering still around the 6% mark. The focus areas here, when we talk about performance management, oops, lost my slide controls there, is that this area is really a catch-all for about leveraging practices and policies and processes to help optimize and align individual performance with what the organization needs them to do, right? This could be a really broad category if we start to include all the compensation items that we've already touched on, or possibly manager effectiveness and or culture, which we're going to talk about under Change HR. But for the purposes of this category, we're just primarily trying to get on aligning and optimizing individual work outputs that impact ultimately engagement and retention, right? So this topic is closely tied to the job role transformation item and the Change HR, but we're going to look at more structure between those in a moment. So the key commentary and items that we saw here are that goals and PM cycles are being bookended to start and complete a cycle, right? So maybe early in the year you start goal management, and then later in the year you do performance evaluations. But in the middle, you've got this 10 or 11 months of inactivity around those goals, or people lose sight of it. And that's called the PM handing. So we really want to avoid that and start leveraging continuous performance management tools to help organizations get to that point where they're doing things meaningful along that side. Secondly, we want to start taking action. Leslie, can I ask a favor?
Sure.
Can you resume the slide deck for a second? I need to step away for just 2 seconds. Why don't we let you talk about your next slide, which is Change HR, and then I'll come back and talk about those other ones.
Okay, no problem. I'm happy to do that if you want to throw it over to the Change HR.
I did.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're going to look at Change HR. So this was actually one of the biggest changes. Actually, we had about a 14% decrease down from last year. And as you can see, if we change HR, how do we define it? We define it as HR's role and focus. So a change HR is how HR's role and focus will change based on trends. So we had 3 categories, subcategories that came up. So we put them under HR strategy, change management, and business partner responsiveness. Now, over the previous years, we actually had more of those categories. But as we had talked about earlier, a lot of those have actually started to like the other category have transitioned out into more of the broader categories because they've had a little bit more substance of that. So I'm going to talk about the HR strategy. So HR strategy, what we're seeing in the articles we're reading is HR needs to think about embracing that flex work, which I've talked about before, looking at those new norms, which when we're talking about recruitment, we've got to think about that too as part of our strategy. And of course, leveraging our data to prove what the impact is. So that's going to be very key for HR, is using that data to showcase what decisions we want to make, how we want to recruit, what kind of policies we want to put in, talking about pay transparency. That's going to be a big piece right there. And the other part is burnout is real. Like we've talked about that. Dan has talked about that. And you know, one of the interesting articles that we read too is about identifying fatigue as well, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about the change management piece. But it really ties well into the burnout. And that's going to be a change management piece that HR professionals are going to have to get more acquainted with and get more educated on as well. The other piece is the 4-day work week. So we read a few articles that kept referencing this 4-day work week. It's, you know, there was a few companies that were testing out the strategy to see whether or not that worked. Some of those results are coming back, and it's showing that 4-day work week actually equals more productivity. So it includes that work-life balance, and people are willing to work and get things done in a shorter period of time to have that work-life balance and have that sort of extra day. So this is something we may see coming up in the next 2024. I think beyond, we're going to maybe see a shift towards companies thinking about that 4-day work week. And then we also have a sort of rethinking leadership as leadership as well. And actually, it's very similar to what Dan had said. We need to think about how, as an HR organization, how are we representing ourselves? How are we having that executive input? How are we being received on that piece as well? You know, it was interesting on a few articles that we read on how CEOs perceive HR versus how HR does, and we need to make sure we're changing that. So that's going to be a part of it as well. And then the other piece is trust, right? And so we need to get trust with our employees. That is a big piece like that. And as you see from what Dan had talked about, the employee experience, and this is actually, if I had to boil it down to one thing for 2024, it's probably going to be trust. And Dan, you can feel free to correct me if you want, but I think trust is going to be a big element that's really weaving its way through a lot of these different trends, is that employees want to work for an organization that they trust. They want to trust that they're being taken care of, that they're being listened to, that they have that flexibility, that they have that whole employee experience. So as part of 2024, we're looking at our HR strategies. These are pieces that we're going to have to look at. So the other piece, which was the second biggest, would be the change management. So with change management, HR teams, and I've talked about this, are still struggling to demonstrate their impact on the business. So we need to take a look on how we're doing this and get that change management sort of mentality. One of the things that we're seeing is a lot of organizations have business centers, HR business centers, and they've really kind of siloed themselves. And what we're going to see in 2024 and moving forward is those becoming more solution areas. They're going to have solution areas where it'll help actually drive the business. And the other piece too is in regards to change effort, which is interesting. There's change fatigue, and we're going to talk about that. And there's stats that there's 75% of change effort it flops, like it doesn't work. I think we've all seen that when we've implemented various systems, or we're trying to renovate stuff. If we're not doing that change management correctly, it's going to fail. So when you're doing change management, you want to engage those end users, you want to engage them early and often and have that buy-in. And Gardner had an excellent article out, and they talked about that, about how organizations can build in that change fatigue management into their plans for pushing their initiatives and making them successful. The other piece too, and we've kind of touched upon this as well, is hybrid or remote as well, and how we're shifting on how we connect employees. So it's interesting when we look at hybrid and remote, our workplace has changed from you would go to work, work with your employee or work with your coworkers, and then you do something socially afterwards and have that sort of engagement. And it's actually kind of reversed now, where if more people are working from home or in hybrid, if they do go hybrid, they're going to work actually for that socialization, which is interesting. And so looking at how that has changed as an organization, we need to think about different ways we can engage our people. Okay.
Awesome.
And the last piece of that is sort of business partner and responsiveness. So, one of the things that we saw is about manager habits. So we want to reestablish good manager habits. We need to really look at especially our middle managers. We need to focus on removing some process hurdles for them. Like, our middle managers are the backbone of our organizations, and they're the ones that are stuck with all the different processes. And we really need to start to remove some of those hurdles for them, and make sure that we have our people for what they're hired for, doing what they're hired for, and not stuck in process, nitty gritty type of things. So that's some of the thing we've been hearing, reading in some of the articles. And then the other stat that actually Dan found, which I thought was really interesting, and it said that hundreds and thousands of employees went on strike across Europe and North America in 2023 because of pay and, of course, working conditions. But it also indicated that the employee-employee relation had really broken down. Like, it had a lot of more of strikes than we're being used to, and they're just not looking at the pay and the working conditions. Some of those conversations are now, what can you else do for me that's outside of that? So they're really looking for more than just the pay and the working conditions. So that's changed a little bit. And I think I've probably covered most of that. I know,
You
Dan,
did.
I'm sure there's lots that you could
So
add. This is such a great category.
it is. It touches almost all of them. And thank you for shifting, Leslie.
No
The
problem.
joys and the humanization of a real live event is that, living in the country, when your dog corners a driver, a courier in your driveway, you have to
Oh
go and
dear.
attend to it. So I'm back and I'm here full attention right now.
I was
He's a
wondering.
friendly dog, but not everybody believes that. So
So
let's jump in where we left off on performance
love
management,
it.
if we could. We were talking about avoiding that PM hammock, which is the continuous performance cycle. And much like Leslie was just saying, that PM cycle really should consist of frequent check-ins, because those check-ins create trust. We see stats from Harvard Business Review that says 56% of people trust a complete stranger. Only 46% would actually trust their manager in the organization they work for. So until you've got those regular cadence of one-on-ones and check-ins, not just around the goals and the performance, but around work and work life and the personalized moments that we're going to talk about in learning and development, that's when you're going to start moving the needle on that trust and respect stage. The last part around performance management is that it's going to be an imperative. I mean, there are coming changes to the European Union, Canada, and Australia that are going to impact pay for performance and gender reporting. And you need to document and demonstrate why there are gaps in pays coming. So not only is it going to be a smart thing to do, it's going to be a requirement in the near future. And a special call out, Leslie mentioned that one article from AIHR who talked about the end of BS jobs. And yes, BS means really what you think it is. And they discuss the value of giving data to managers to actually understand what their employees are dealing with to help identify productive roles versus BS type roles. Let's get rid of them out of the organization and create roles that make people happy to be doing them and deliver value and productivity out of them. So big org stats here, or HRSC stat of note, is that orgs with PM software are 2.6 times more likely to be industry leaders. Let's shift this, because closely tied to performance is learning and development. So we've got a lot to talk about on this theme. Two major subcategories: net new learning and then reskilling and upskilling. When we, the age-old adage of buying new talents or growing them seems to really dominate this topic. And the answers here clearly are telling us that it's easier to grow than it is. It's far more affordable to grow than it is to kind of bring in new talent. So we're also seeing, and Leslie talked about this, recruitment, skills advancements or training and development is equal to dollars in currency right now. So we're seeing opportunities to leverage training and development as an attractant to an organization, or certainly as an engager if it's about internal mobility. When we talk about new learning, a couple things kind of cropped up. They're really suggesting the adoption of virtual reality platforms. It's significant, right? It can speed up time to competency incredibly. And they're also talking about developing specific coursework for Gen Zers who now are becoming managers, possibly for the first time, and may not have any experience leading at all. And then the last or third bullet here is really around new training on soft skills for managers to be able to do those check-ins and the one-on-ones and manage the well-being and the human experience management. Because people come to work and they think they need to know how to block, tackle, and guard and do all of those things that the business needs them to do. But really what they need to do is learn how to manage the people that are going to be doing them for them. And empathy and understanding is a big part of that we don't tend to teach managers as they get into that role. There was some data that said, I think I use it here at the end of this slide, 73%, according to Gartner's, of leaders are not equipped to lead at the moment, right? So when we talk about the reskilling and upskilling, again, we have to bring back that inline training in the system. Don't make them go away and do something and then come back and look at it. Deliver it in the platform that it's being done. Training is the currency for recruitment and internal mobility, and upskilling is essential because it needs to keep pace. I mean, we're going to have an exhausted or a whole new set of skills in 5 years from now that we don't even have on the radar in our skills lexicons. So, we need to use skills to advance that and keep up to changing business needs. The big thing here is that orgs that do that soft skills training for managers, which is the empathy and learning to listen, are 2.8 times more likely to generate high performing cultures. Now, we already talked about the change HR item, so I'm going to move past that. And Leslie, was you who were going to talk about the job and role transformations, right?
Yes, and I'm just looking at our time. So I'm
Yep.
going to do this one a little bit more briefly because at the end of the day, we've talked about this. Like this is sort of one of the pillars that sort of embodies everything else, and it increased about 8% over last year. And so areas of focus is that skill change. We've talked about the lack of leadership skills that need to be redeveloped. We want that personalized experience that really has come through on almost every single article we read, and then every single pillar that we have talked about. We want to reevaluate how we, again, with that personalization, how we treat an employee, what does employee need, and what is that employee relationship to the organization. And and we got to look at all the pieces that incorporate that. So whether or not it's hybrid, whether it's a 4-day work week, how do we find the meaningfulness of employees to fulfill their ambitions as well as the organizations as well. And like I liked this one quote, and it said, cool spaces and perks just aren't cutting it anymore. It's just not cutting it. We have we have change. The roles are changing. The what are people expecting are changing, and we need to get behind that and put that strategy together to make sure that we have successful internal retention as well as hiring the best people for the organizations to be successful. Okay, Dan, I'll flip it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, you're right. To sum it up, this is really about employees and organizations rearranging the way they engage with each other.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Last one. No surprise. The biggest gainer in this year, up 15% in response, is artificial intelligence and technology. Really, the focus areas here, I don't think it's much of a surprise to anybody that this is, because it's been a year dominated by talk about all these Gen AI platforms, and they're popping up everywhere. Chat GPT seems to, set the academic world on fire. Kids are using it in school. But the implications for leveraging this generative technology, not to be confused with the predictive one we talked about earlier, is really starting to become obvious for HR. The research that we've read says, as much as 75 or 80% of the workforce, depending on who you're quoting, sees the value of this, but less than 20% are actually doing anything about it. And the primary reason are the concerns about the widespread, risks associated with it. There's risks for bias. There's risks for data security. There's risk for validity. Is the generative AI going to tell you really what it should be telling you? Is it true? And then does it need to be owned by HR or IT, or who's going to run this? Largely the commentary is around those goals, guardrails that we need to put in place. The thing that we can't lose sight of is that we need to do something here. It's happening. And same with performance management. This theme came up more than once. Don't let the idea of perfect get in the way of doing something. Do something, right? So you need to move forward with this strategy. As a lark, we took a chance and I went to my Chat GPT account and said, hey, what are the great trends for HR in 2024? And they gave us this list of 8 items with definitions around them, which is funny because they said that we didn't have data beyond 2002. So I'm not sure how that happens, but it wasn't very much unlike what we're actually saying when I looked at our top 8 issues. So you compare apples to apples, it's a pretty similar comparison. So that is it for the items. Let me round this out quickly. I know we're getting close on time. What does this all mean? These trends are really, everybody's at a different point in their organizational journey. We don't know where you are, what your priorities are, what you've done, what you haven't done yet. So we need to give you some means to actually identify and localize these processes to your own unique challenges. So with that in mind, we have spreadsheets that we can email to you if you want. I'm going to show you screenshots of them right here, or you can just print them from this deck when you get it. And it walks you through a series of steps of just taking each of these items and topics we've discussed today and saying, if I did this and did it well, is it going to create a high, a medium, or a low impact on our business? And then reevaluate you know, what the cost of this is, what's the change management, how do we need to buy services or software or training. So then you're going to grade in the difficulty in doing this operation, high, medium, low again. And then you're going to assess, gee, what are all the costs with this? And you're going to leverage in the cost, high, medium, or low. And you can see pretty quickly, you're going to be able to start to plot out on a 9-box. Here's a blank page for you to print and do this if you wanted to. You could start to take things that are business impact versus difficulty, and you plot out where these items land, and you're going to start to get indicators around, hey, I need to do some performance management and measuring. It's going to produce a good impact, and it's easy to implement. Or maybe on a scale of cost, we can do the same thing and get similar 9-boxes to assess where we want to go. So those are really simple and practical exercises anybody can deploy. I'll be happy to work through these. Leslie and I will with you, okay? And then ideally, you want to create an action plan. What are the people needs, the process needs, the platform needs, and how are we going to measure this? And then walk through. So I've given you some pretty quick, simple explanations here, but armed with this data, with this prioritization exercise, you should be able to actually start and go to your executive committee or your HR teams and say, here's what I think we need to do, and have data to prove your point. Again, I'm Dan Whitmarsh. You can scan that. My wonderful colleague, Leslie Dalzell, you can scan that. Reach out to us. This deck is coming your way. Tell us if you want to go through that prioritization exercise together, or if you just want to learn more about what HR strategies consulting can do. 1 minute over time, but I think we got it done, Leslie. I've seen the questions online.
I have not.
I've been keeping up where I could.
I have not seen all the questions yet.
Okay.
Is there any that we can answer?
Yep, I'm looking at the questions log now. So if you have any questions, please feel free to answer them, put them into the blog, and we can reach out offline or otherwise to solve for these. So thank you all very much for your time and attention. Sorry for the personal disruption, the dog and the courier driver, but we got it done. Slightly a kilter, it got done. Thank you, Leslie.
All right.
You're a great
All right,
colleague.
thanks, Dan. Thanks, Sarah. Okay, bye, everybody.